Okay, welcome to this HR Livewires webinar with Professor Martin Dole and me, Norman Blissett. So welcome, Professor Dole, to be here. Let me give you a bit of an introduction, first of all, about Martin. So Professor Martin Dole was appointed as the first Further Education Trust for Leadership Professor of Leadership in Further Education and Skills at UCL Institute of Education in April 2016, and that's where we are at the moment. And this appointment followed 8 very successful years as Chief Executive of the Association of Colleges. Prior to leading the association, Martin had worked with the Ministry of Defence as its Director of Training and Education, as well as spending 3 years as the RAF's Director of Personnel and Training Strategist, and a whole host of other appointments in the 25 or so years before that as well in the RAF. He was awarded the CB in 2016 for contribution to education and an OBE in 1998 for work in support of operations in the Balkans and for his contribution to Anglo-German relations. And here in his professorship at UCL, what he's concerned with is the distinctive contribution that further education can make to national prosperity and individual well-being and the leadership challenges facing further education providers of all kinds. So, as I say, welcome, Martin. Delighted that you're joining us today. You're coming up for 1 year as an academic, so how has it been over the last year? Quite a change from your previous job.
Yeah, a bit of a change. I feel really privileged to have more time to think about things and reflect on what's going on in further education and to offer some thoughts. I have to say it's also a bit lonely. Going from being with a team to sitting in a room trying to think, if not great thoughts, then reasonably coherent ones, is a bit of a challenge. So it's nice to be here. Nice to have someone to talk to, Norman, this morning, and hopefully to the people out there we're speaking to.
Well, thank you for that. I'm delighted to be here. So over to you, Martin. You're going to take us through some slides on fighting deep and close battles. Your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I'm sorry about the military bit. It's reaching back into the career in the Air Force and where I was teaching at the staff colleges. This idea of deep and close battles. Just to give you the military context of this, it's a close battle is that battle that's right in front of you that you have to fight because the enemy is there or the situation's there to confront. But at the same time, in military doctrine, there's a need to think about the next battle and the battle after that. And it may be in geographical terms, you need to think about behind the enemy or in time, something that comes later. So the concept is always, the close battle is always contributing to a longer term objective. That sounds very military. Try to change it into kind of more into the world that.
Press it down. Let's try that.
Right, yeah, into the world of further education and education generally. The close engagements, the close battles that I'd say would be things like September recruitment and demographics. So, the demographics, the student demand next year is not something that's going to change. You are going to recruit students in September. Your processes need to be right. The numbers might be up, might be down, but you have to get the numbers in order to make the business work. Funding changes and reality changes, area-based reviews, apprenticeship reform, all of those things are going to happen and they're going to affect you tomorrow, the day after. And the big thing about close battles is they can't be avoided. You have to fight on the terms that are before you and have to engage with those things, those emergencies, those actions that need to be taken. But deep battles, and in this context, I'm talking about where do we want to be in 5 years or where do we want to be in 10 years. When I talk to colleges quite often, first of all, they say they can't be answered. Policy change occurs so frequently in further education that you can't predict the world, what the world will be like in 5 or 10 years. And therefore, I'm just not even going to bother. I'm just going to get on with business, fight the next close battle, but do the next thing I need to do, see where that takes me, then do the next thing, and then the next thing, and just, follow my best instincts and get on with business. I'd actually say that amounts to a case of neglect. I think you can, if not answer where we're precisely going to be in 5 years, actually begin to affect your chances of succeeding over that period of time by taking a firmer view about those deep battles and what will need to be in place in order to succeed over the longer term. I think kind of two particular groups of factors here that are worth taking into account. One is about understanding underlying trends and patterns. These are longer than the immediate policy changes, but I'm not going to concentrate much on that today. That's a whole other area of analysis. But I'm going to concentrate on the second bit here about identity, purpose, and values, and a related issue about the vision thing that informs an organization's actions over a longer period of time. So identity, purpose, and values is kind of the focus this morning. I think you get to develop answers to the identity, purpose, values by asking some fundamental questions, and they come out things like big questions like who, why, and what. Who do we serve? Who is our community? Who are our customers? If like who do we serve? Why are we doing things? Is it because we've been told to do it? It's because we've just ended up doing them. Why are we doing this and not another thing? And the most particular one I think is important is what is our distinctive contribution to the market, if you're a private provider or for profit, to a community, if you're a charity, or to the place that you're in, if, for instance, you're a college. Thinking through those things, I do think you begin to talk about purpose, and purpose is a word. If we're in the military, we'd be talking about defining mission, but actually much at the heart of that is defining purpose, what we're for, who we're for, and why we're for them. And when you strip this back, it's most often the case, I think, in colleges, purpose will come out of having a firm sense of yourself and what you do, and also particularly the place that the college serves. For profit organizations, I think it's about focus and identifying the market segment that you serve and actually defines your business. And for a charity, it's about the charitable objects and the community you serve over an extended area. I'm deeply allergic, I think, to management books and self-help books. They just make me feel disappointed in myself. But I have read one recently, which I think is worth a look. It's by a guy called Rumelt, Good and Bad Strategy. Distilling 190 words down to something, the key message from Rumelt is that he will say, I think, that a good strategy tells you as much about what you won't do as what you will do. It therefore becomes a way in which you induce focus in your organization and direction. These kind of a sample of mission statements and purpose statements, if you like, taken from college websites. I've taken out the names to protect, not to be indiscreet. But actually, if you look at those in some detail, apart from the last one, which gives a little bit more direction, they could apply to pretty much any organization. And I find it hard, sorry, the one that's gives more direction is to provide outstanding residential and community education, which begins to give you a definition of what precisely the organisation will do and a greater sense of direction. The others, a variety, I think, of straplines or statements of the common good, rather than giving that sense of direction and purpose. So thinking about the mission statement or the purpose statement, I think, becomes very important because it begins to define yourself. If you combine, which we might discuss in a moment with Norman, this idea about purpose with values and ethics, then I think you get the other flip side of this. The values and ethics begins to drive the type of behaviors that apply within an organization. It's ethos, not a series of slogans on a wall, but a series of values that guide people's actions from day to day, that they can see themselves in and relate to, and give an organization perhaps a sense of moral compass in what they do. And that's not just the top, that's the whole of the organization, and involves also students in an educational setting. Interesting to see how those are defined and derived. I, for instance, was tasked with some colleagues in my Air Force career when I was doing the Director of Personnel Training and Strategy to actually write the core ethos values of the Royal Air Force. And that was in 2005, over 75 to 85 years later than the Air Force was set up. They came from the organization, they were lived by the organization, and imparted a sense of being and belonging to those that were joining the organisation they could recognise themselves in and why they joined the organisation. Without that firm sense of self and place, or firm sense of purpose, and a set of values and ethics to guide, I think what happens is the sector and those within it, they just become reactive, and they become being done to. The next government policy is how we will react to it, what we will do, what we're told, just in a slavish way. It can also induce a victim mentality about being done to. The analogy I've come up with, I'm never sure, Michael Gove will probably put the right difference between an analogy and a metaphor, but treading water and not swimming. Treading water is about keeping your head above the water to survive, but you don't actually move somewhere. It's surviving in order to survive, that somebody then might come and rescue you. Well, swimming's the same, it keeps your head above water, but with a sense of direction, a direction that's most likely to deliver you to safety under your own terms, but it's with a sense of direction. It's to a particular point rather than just surviving to survive. And on occasions, I think organizations can just tread water to survive rather than to achieve a defined outcome. And I guess you're to an act and react cycle, which is very similar to my point about just fight the next close battle, rather than having a sense of direction in connecting all the actions you're carrying out in a particular direction and towards an objective. I think the close and deep is also interesting to see about what sort of behaviours it requires. People in the close battle need to be, I think, managerial, control resources well. They need to be resilient because you have setbacks, but need to be also agile to move quickly in one direction or another. There's a high kind of quotient put on motivation and actually competitive behaviour, both internally and externally. The board of a college, for instance, in this case, is closely involved in scrutiny, looking over the returns of the student recruitment, success rates, and the finances. And they'll also be involved in providing emotional support to the staff. When you go to the deep kind of battle, then it's much more reflective. I think it's looking at taking a long-termist view. It absolutely involves looking outwards to see the world outside and how the college or the business sits within the world. There is still a quotient on it, resilient, but it allows for collaborative behavior because you're taking a longer view and you're plotting, and it's not such an immediate kind of competitive urge, and you can perhaps make longer term arrangements. For the board, it's about custodianship of the mission, understanding the soul of the organization, and preventing the executive chasing the next fashion, which may or may not be attractive, but is not necessarily to do with the purpose of the organization. And also involves a degree of objectivity, stepping back from the world and taking a more immediately disinterested view. Norman asked me to comment on this as well. So some of my thinking is informed by military analogies, and the famous one many people have heard of this: no plan survives contact with the enemy. And the argument from those colleges and others who will say that you can't have a long-term view is, I can't predict tomorrow what's going to happen, so why would it bother? And in that sense, no plan. We always have a plan, but it never works out the way it is, never survives contact with the real world. Well, I kind of, in honesty, that was what von Moltke said, but he did have plans. He had plans of a particular character. And I kind of try to think this through in a schematic, is that in the near term, that you can have a narrow plan with some precise objectives and a reasonable chance of getting there. That said, however, when I was teaching in this environment to senior military officers, my introductory video for the session was always, for those that may have seen it, you might be able to get on video, was sliding doors where Gwyneth Paltrow trips on her steps going down to a tube station and gets on. In one version of her life, she gets on the tube one time, and the other time she misses the tube. From there, her life takes two completely different trajectories, and she ends up in a completely different place. So small changes can affect longer term plans, but nonetheless, in the near term, there's a chance you'll get it right. But as you move on, it will never quite turn out in year 2 as expected, nor in year 3. That don't really matter, I don't think, if you're still moving towards the broad vision, the broad direction of travel you're seeking to achieve. We'll come to the vision thing in a moment, but what keeps you, if you like, between the lines, it would be my submission, is having a clear sense of mission and purpose, and those values and ethics guiding your behavior. And there can be alternative futures within that kind of progression. But what you don't want to be doing is moving away. The bottom line moves you towards your broad vision. The top line begins to get what in military terms is called mission creep, or mission, not mission extension, but mission creep. With a consequence, you can go around, as is in the front, in a circle, or on the second, become a different sort of organization without really realizing you've become that different organization, neglecting your core purpose. I go back to the kind of the vision piece. It kind of interesting how you would state that. We might talk about that with Norman in a moment, but what conditions you put and how you express a vision. But it needs, as I say, to be broad, because precisely defining where you'll be in 10 years is a mug's game. But that doesn't mean to say you can't say, well, I broadly want to achieve what type of organization I am, and what goals I set myself in the broadest terms. But if you make that too broad, you don't have a sense of direction. You start moving to the north or to the south, away from what you were at the start, and don't have that sense of purpose and direction. In terms of further closing thoughts, Norman asked me this before the session about who does what around these things. And it's interesting to say perhaps what order you might do them. First of all, it's my firm belief, others might have other views and might have a conversation about it. The purpose is the one you do first. It should be set by the board, prompted often by the chief executive, but not owned by the executive. In that role of custodianship of the purpose, the soul of the organization, feel that sits with the board, and it's what will pertain over a longer period, 10, 20 years. It needs also to be, for me, a statement which has got no superlatives in it, and with which every word counts. Now, I'll say it's a perfect example, but in terms of the Association of Colleges, which I led, we burnt it down to a simple statement, which was to represent and promote the interests of colleges. And we did add on there, which against my better judgment in some ways, and to provide them with a range of support services. But every word there mattered. And we analysed every word to say what it would be to be successful in representing and promoting colleges. What we needed to do, we need to understand colleges, their interests, we need to understand the world that they're operating within, and it gave direction. And it pretty much allowed me, as chief executive and the board, to say to anybody, is what you are doing representing and promoting the interests of colleges? If it's not, why are you doing it? Why are you using member subscription fees in order to do that? The support services were important because they generated income and enabled colleges to do better work, and enable us to better represent and promote colleges. So that, I think, belongs to the board. It needs to be prompted by the chief executive. Boards quite often want to have a long, involved definition of purpose. I think it needs to be short, precise, and say every word counts. Now, in terms of the values bit, the opposite. I'm from personal experience, both in the Air Force and actually the AOC and the number of colleges I'm involved with. I think values need to be built with and by the whole organisation, because people in the organisation need to see themselves in the values and relate to them. Because values, I think, only have utility if they're reflected in behaviour. So they guide behaviour on a day-to-day basis. It tells an organisation the way in which they will do things. There might be lots of similarity of other organisations, but when you combine it with the purpose and the context, it gives a sense of the organisation, its character. And as I say, and that needs, I think, to be facilitated by the wider executive team with the whole organisation, and lived by them, and only endorsed by the board. The final one, the vision thing. Kind of thought about this a good deal. I don't want to buy into the view of heroic leadership, that the chief executive is all, but I'm probably on this with another management book I've read, a few, with Jim Collins about his analogy of getting people on the bus. Once you've worked out what the purpose of the organization is, you've looked around your organization, seen its capabilities, made an assessment, you're in a better place to say where you think you can take this organization within a 5 to 10 year period. Then I think you begin to build the vision with the organization, but it starts with the chief executive for me, and then it finally is endorsed by the board. So the board owns the purpose, always the purpose first. I could see you could do the vision second and the value third, but I can finally do values second and then the vision. But I kind of think the chief executive most likely is going to have the firmest role in setting the vision and getting buy-in from others and building it in a way which kind of infuses people and inspires people. I see it quite possibly could be done other ways. It might be done by the board. I think it'd be quite hard to do it the whole organisation without the chief executive taking a leading role. And that's kind of my pitch. And just a final quote I like. And it does begin to say what that defined reality I take to be is what's a realistic set of goals for us, and prompting the board to say what the reality is or what we are. And then the leader becomes the guide between those two, particularly if there are strong values which guide people's actions day to day. They know what the organisation is about. They know what's expected of them because they buy into the behaviours and the conduct that's expected of them. And all the leader has to do between that and achieving the vision is most often to serve the team.
Okay, thank you for that, Martin. That's really insightful, fascinating thoughts on.
I hope they'll be the judge of this.
So really, really good and enjoyable. I've got a few questions if that's all right. And the first is, you started with the importance of a board, of an organisation, knowing where they want to get to in 5 years, 10 years. Is that something that they need to do in a very concrete way? For example, would they have a series of options, if you like, that they can pick from according to circumstances, or is it more a sense of a vision of possible places where they might want to get to?
I think it's more aspirational, about broader statements of where they would want to get to. I'll give you an example, but a college example and also an AOC example. But when we've done the mission purpose, we began to say what would be the constituents of that, which would tell us that we were representing and promoting college as well. So it became, for instance, to be the most credible source of advice for colleges on policy, to be respected as a credible and authoritative analytical source. So those began to say, and then to say to be a great place to work, or recognized as a great place to work. From that, we began to derive some broad objectives and indicators were moving in that direction. Importantly, some of those were objective, some of them were subjective judgments that we would make to ourselves. After that, then we went to do the values. 2 years on, we drew out the values because we could see how we were behaving, what was going wrong, how we need to change our behaviours. But I think by nature, the vision needs to be broad, might be broken down to 3-4 different areas, and induces direction together with the purpose and the values. In a college setting, it might be, for instance, if the mission is to provide technical and professional education to meet the needs of students, employers, and the community in X area, it might be the vision thing is to be the most highly regarded provider of technical and professional education in XXX. It might be to have the most expert staff providing technical professional education in the following areas in 5 years' time. It might be to be recognized as an organization that promotes prosperity or contributes to prosperity with partners. Now you can then disinter each of those broad objectives into nearer term things you might do The nearer term things can then be related to direct policy changes and limitations and constraints that apply. But the vision doesn't need to change over 5 years. How you realize the vision needs to change according to circumstances that you're presented with. We were discussing before, a great example of that is a college I went to last week, an adult residential college in the north of England. Adult education's taken a 45% cut, which took a 45% cut between 2010 and 2015. It's kind of would end the world for a lot of organisations, and particularly one which was specialised in adult education. There would have been a huge temptation for that organisation to become something different, to take on 16 to 18-year-olds, for which they weren't really set up, to start doing apprenticeship, for which they weren't expert in doing. But the college has kept true to its purpose, its ethos, its values, and it's got smaller, has adapted its provision, has made cost savings, has generated extra income from the core business that they're providing, such that when and if circumstances should get better for adult education, which incidentally I think they will, with an aging population, with Brexit, with a focus on greater mental well-being, a focus on healthy communities, then that college will be in the right place to succeed. Its goals, I don't look at its vision, but if its vision is to be the most respected provider of adult and community education in the north of England, or the most respected provision of residential education that contributes to well-being amongst, they stay the same. How you'll deliver that will change over time, but the vision remains the same. And the purpose has been strong, the values are strong. That college, I confidently say, will be in place and succeeding, be outstanding for the next 50 years.
Yeah, it's a good point about really knowing what it is that you do and being very clear about that and sticking to that. On the values, which obviously I agree are fundamentally important here. The problem that I have with values is that many organisations will have very similar values. They'll be written in the same way, and often will be in conflict with what you actually see inside that organisation. So how do you make the values real and to really capture what's needed to achieve that vision?
I don't think you should be afraid of some of the values being the same as other organisations.
Yeah.
I, for instance, would find it hard to work within any organisation that didn't have some expression, some set of comments around integrity and honesty, because it's part of my kind of approach to life. But that's part of it. I expect people to work with to exhibit integrity and honesty. And you see that in the RAF's core values. You see it in the OCs. You see it in Hope, where I'm working now. Those are just fundamentals. So you see a re-expression of that in every there. So don't be afraid, I don't think, of being seen the same in different places. It's the context which comes from the purpose which makes it different. And secondly, I think this is where I do think it's absolutely fundamental. There must be built with the people in the organisation being involved, so they see themselves in those values and they feel that they can then aspire to those behaviours and check themselves in what they are doing. Does it meet the purpose? But more particularly, is this the way we do things here? It defines, the purpose defines what we're going to do. The vision defines where we want to get to. The values define the way we do things here. There shouldn't be 10 on a big wall that no one can ever remember, but neither should they be chanted out every day. It's like in the morning when you have to do an incantation about where they are. But the people that are affected by them must own them. There must be, I think, also being very direct, clear language, because what they drive is behaviour. And unless the other thing comes in, I think that the board doesn't set the values, I don't think, but the board and the executive, or those built with the team, must model those behaviours. And each one another should be able to challenge each other to do this. And I went to, set up a new joint services command and staff college combined with King's College London and the military when I was in part of the team doing that. And we came up with a thing saying the Joint Services Command Staff College way. And the way embodied our values, the way we were going to do business, which made us different from others. There was a combination of those rather than any single one.
Yeah.
And some of the language kind of would be the
Quite
same.
interchangeable. Yeah.
I mean, one of the AOC we had, which was particularly, so we took out, didn't do the values thing for about 3-4 years. It was actually to be challenging of government and of each other. So the key word there was challenging. Another word was to be passionate about colleges and their students. The key word there was passionate. So you expected people to go to 2 or 3 others along there, to go to work expecting to be challenging, to be passionate, to be respectful. You could sum it up in 3-4 words, and you could almost, and I quite rightly had more junior staff coming to me saying, Martin, what you just said was not being passionate about what we're doing.
So
If you expect me to be like that, don't expect not to be yourself.
Yeah, and I think also the 3 link together.
Yeah.
So it's about being challenging, but in a respectful way,
with integrity and passion.
And so yeah.
So, but that absolutely came home. And I think we involved every member of staff intended to in a big away day, and it was facilitated by my team. I kind of sat in the background a bit. Times facilitated it, but pretty much stood away from it. But it was their values, the ones they felt comfortable with, the ones they demanded of each other's colleagues, the ones they felt they wanted to emulate and model. So that's why that comes from there. The purpose, though, I kind of think it's not the staff can't set the purpose in quite the same way with the team, because each member of the team has an interest, which might be sectional, it might be subject related, it might be from a college perspective a department interest. I think it needs to be set dispassionately with a view to the history, the future, a view about what we do well, and distinctiveness in quite a disciplined way, which I think is why it's got to come from the board. Yeah, prompted and chivied by the chief exec, the board owns the purpose. I think that happens as private sector as well as public sector.
When it's done well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, Martin. So thank you very much for your insights. Really enjoyed listening and asking a few questions, and I hope everyone else has as well. So thank you for watching, and thank you again, Martin.
If you've got questions, please do ask. All right.